Alright, so welcome back, everybody. So, Everdell Farshore has been the talk of the town, so to speak. I don't own Everdell Farshore like some of the other YouTubers do, but somebody was able to show off all of the cards in one of their videos, so I took pictures of all of the new cards from Everdell Farshore. And when I was looking at all the new cards, I noticed there were some comparisons with some existing Everdell cards from the original Everdell. But while there's still some comparisons, there's still a lot of differences for sure. Very many, several differences. So I'm going to show you guys some of the cards that are similar to the new cards for Everdell Farshore that are similar, but obviously still very different. And also, since this is on an iPad, the picture quality of the card isn't going to be spectacular, but you should still be able to read and see everything on the card and see what it does at least. So that's something. So let's get started, and I'll show you kind of what I noticed as far as comparisons are concerned. So first we have Warehouse, which is obviously Everdell Farshore, right? So one thing to note is these resources here. Now, there's a lot of people that are explaining, obviously, several different things. You know, there's reviews and stuff like that, but it's obviously important to first note what these resources are. So this is a sea stone here. This is seaweed. And this is driftwood. So driftwood is basically like the twigs from Everdell. The seaweed, I guess, is similar to the resin from Everdell, as its, likeness. Not exactly the same, obviously. Resin and seaweed are two completely different things. And then I think these are called sea stones. Sea stones, I believe, which are, I guess, similar to the pebbles from Everdell. So those are the three of the different resources. And then the critters, instead of berries, it's mushrooms instead of berries. And you'll notice it even has a picture of a mushroom on this card. So those are for obviously playing critters. Now this game is very similar to the regular Everdell, with some obviously differences in gameplay a little bit. So this isn't going to be an explanation of how the game works. This is going to just show you, this video is just to show you the new cards, as well as obviously the comparisons of existing cards from the original Everdell. So let's get started. So we have Warehouse here. Obviously this is how much victory points it is. Now the card that I found that is, oh, wrong side. The card that I found that is similar to Warehouse is actually from the New Leaf expansion. So Freight Car here, if you'll look closely at the card in comparison, they are very similar. Very similar. They're both green production. Obviously, the Freight Car is worth more victory points. The resources are similar, but still not quite the same either. They're almost polar opposites in comparison. But yeah, I mean, they're both unique constructions. So these are just, very similar. So this very similar, the most similar card to Warehouse for sure. So like I said, we'll just kind of go through this fairly fast because most of these cards are, pretty self-explanatory as far as which cards are similar to others. So Tumbler and Mine are obviously very similar to each other because, it's a pebble and it's a sea stone. And even the resources are the same. Even the victory point is the same, as you can see. So that's probably one of the few cards in this game that is like almost completely identical. Almost. Obviously, there are a lot of other things that are different, like you can play critters off of constructions in Everdell, but you can't really do that in Everdell Farshore. You'll notice there's no icon down here that says, this critter can be played with this construction, for instance. There's none of that. You get 3 anchors, and you can use those anchors to basically play a critter for free with a construction of the same type of icon on it. So, you know, you can play a free critter, green production critter with a green production construction or something like that. But you only get 3 anchors, and then that's it. And you can, so that means you can only do it 3 times. So obviously similar to New Leaf's special tokens that New Leaf had, similar to that, I guess. So yeah, Mine and Tumbler, basically the same card, with the exception of obviously a different type of resource, sort of, you know. Okay, so then we have the Tangle Raft and the Resin Refinery. Both construction cards, technically. Obviously, they each are similar in the same respects, except obviously the resources are very different. The Tangle Raft is just a couple of driftwood, while the Resin Refinery is a pebble and a resin. So the resources are obviously different, but the victory point's the same. They're both common construction, and obviously they're both basically giving you the same resource as far as, well, what they technically do, I suppose. So, yeah, very similar. The C chip and the chip sweep are obviously similar in some regards. Obviously, the ability is exactly the same, basically. The victory points are a little different, but the food cost is also different as well. But, you know, still pretty similar. So the Scriptorium is a cool card, because you can draw up to 2 cards from the bay, which is like the meadow, and you can also draw up to 2 cards from the deck, so you're actually getting 4 cards, which is really cool. Very powerful for sure. And so that means that it's better than Fairgrounds, because Fairgrounds only gives you 2 cards. But then the Lamplighter could potentially give you 2 cards from the meadow or the deck or the station, but you're only getting 2 cards. So it's like these 2 cards combined is what the Scriptorium is, basically. So yeah, that's kind of the closest equation you're going to get. And obviously, these 2 combined are still worth more victory points regardless. But yeah, that's pretty much a similarity for sure. Scribe is not really related to anything, I don't think. Not too much. There's some cards that are similar to it. So like the Bard, for instance, these are seashells. Seashells are victory point tokens in Everdell, basically. And so, you know, you can discard up to 5 cards with the Bard, right, to get 5 point tokens. This one, you can only do it up to 3, but you're getting point tokens, and you're getting cards for each. So, that's cool, but there's, like, not a huge similarity to it. Other than that, let's move on. Okay, so the Scavenger is probably a better card, because this Harvester here, which is basically the same thing, I'm pretty sure this icon means wild resource, as in any resource you want, or something like that. While you can gain a resource of your choice with this Harvester, it has to be paired with the Gatherer to do it. This one isn't paired with anything to get it. So this is like way better. It's also the same amount of victory points, and it's cheaper in food cost too for the Scavenger. But also, that's another thing in this game. There's no Gatherer / Harvester that can go. There's no cards that can go on top of each other or share the same space with each other like in regular Everdell. So those are the major differences, obviously, there. But the resource you're getting the ability is basically the same, except better here, obviously. So once again, this is a better version of the Peddler. So the Merchant and the Peddler are obviously very similar. They're both, well, trying to sell their wares, of course, but their food cost is the same. This is also worth more victory points than the Peddler is. And not only that, but the Peddler, you have to basically pay up to 2 resources to get an equal amount of resources of your choice. While this one is, you may pay 1 resource to gain 2 of your choice, I think. Like I said, I don't know all the details of this game, but I'm pretty sure these are wild resources. So if that is the case, this is a much better card than Peddler is, for sure. But that's, you know, that's the similarity to that. So Grove and Farm are basically the same. Yeah, this is not the original farm. This is a cheaper farm from Mistwood. But you get the point. They both give you basically the same food resource to pay for, obviously, critters in your town. And if this was the original farm, it would be basically the same thing in cost. It would be 2 twigs and 2 versus 2 driftwood, and 1 resin versus 1 seaweed, for instance. But basically, they're the same thing. Same victory points and everything else. So, but both green production cards, but still very similar, obviously. So the diver, you can pay up to 3 resources of your choice for 1 treasure chest for each. Now, I think the treasure chests are like worth victory points at the end of the game if you have a bunch of them, but they're also potentially, I think, a wild resource too, maybe, I think. But regardless of the case, if it is the case that you're getting that they can be worth victory points at the end of the game, these treasure chests. The wood carver and the doctor and the miller from New Leaf expansion are all basically these 3 cards combined into this. Well, there isn't a card out there that you can pay up to 3 resin, I don't think, to gain 1 point token for each. But so this is still a way better version because these are like 3 cards and this is 1 card doing everything that these are doing, plus obviously resin. So that's cool. But yeah, that's the closest thing you get to similar to that, from the diver to those 3 cards. That's the closest you're gonna get that I know of. The twig barge and obviously the beach sledge are basically exactly the same. They're worth the same amount of victory points, but the resources are obviously different. But other than that, they're the same ability. So pretty similar, but still different, obviously. So that's it for green production cards that have some similarities to the cards that I found. So let's move on to the next one, which is going to be blue governance. And so here we have the port. And the port is very similar to the courthouse. The resources are basically the same, as you can tell. The point token, the amount of points is basically the same. They're both blue governance. They're both unique constructions, and they both have the same ability with the exception of one thing. You'll notice with the port, you gain 1 of those 3 resources after you play a critter. You'll notice the courthouse here, you'll gain 1 of those 3 resources after you play a construction. So that means they're like exact opposites of what cards you play, which means that the critter that has the similar power here is obviously going to be different than the critter from obviously regular Everdell. So while it is almost exactly the same, as you can see, there is still some differences to how you play it. Courthouse versus port. So it's cool. I liked that they did that. They still made it, similar, but not completely. And so that's cool. Okay, so then we have the market here. The market, you can now, assuming this is 3 resources of your choice, this is interesting. That's not something I've seen in the core game, where you can pay 3 resources of your choice to play a card into your town, into your area, right? And this one is letting you do 3 of your choice to play the market into your town, I think. So that is unique, obviously. But it's a lot more expensive than the crane, because the crane is only a pebble. So unless you had like 3 driftwood, and driftwood was still easy to get or something like that, maybe it wouldn't be such a bad thing. But other than that, when playing a card, you may discard this market from your city to pay 3 fewer resources. So it's basically the same as crane, but with the crane, obviously, it's just when you're playing a construction. So that means that the market is basically these 2 cards in one, basically. I mean, the inventor from New Leaf, which I didn't bother to grab, is basically the same thing too, almost, right? But yeah, it's basically the innkeeper and the crane combined into one that this card is. So obviously this one is better than these two combined, you know, because he can do it with any card. So that's cool. That means you don't have to have multiples of these taking up space. Technically, you just need this one. So that's pretty cool, but still somewhat similar. So here we have the Historian and the Lighthouse Keeper. As you can see, they're almost completely identical. This one says you can draw a card after you play a critter or construction. This says you may draw one card after you play a card. Well, that's basically the same thing. Basically, they just didn't put down critter and construction for some reason. But they're basically the same thing in that regard, unless there's something else I'm not aware of that Farshore has that I'm not aware of. But then again, it costs more to play the Lighthouse Keeper than it does the Historian, but they're worth the same amount of victory points. So pretty close to. I'm gonna have to say that's very close to being the same for sure. Now these are like polar opposites, but they're basically the same card when you think about it. So the Lighthouse and the Clock Tower, they look kind of, you know, tall for sure. Obviously, it's the exact opposite in resources. You know, three sea stones and one pebble, one driftwood and 3 twigs. They're the exact opposite. Now, the ability here is completely unique. I'm not saying this is similar to this card here. These abilities, they're completely different. They're only similar to the fact that that they look kind of the same as far as tallness is concerned, you know. But you know, and they both look like they're paired with this one, because this is a Lighthouse Keeper, and the Historian and the Clock Tower go together, obviously. Now this game, the Lighthouse Keeper and the Lighthouse don't actually go together, because you still can't play the Lighthouse Keeper for free, but you know, the theme of it is similar, obviously, at least. But the ability is completely different, as you can see. And I don't know the full extent of this ability because, like I said, I don't know everything about Farshore. So, but it is definitely different than the Clock Tower ability for sure. So I only grabbed it simply because of, obviously, the Historian and the Lighthouse Keeper being the same. Almost exactly the same. So here we have the Herbalist, which is a frog, which is, you know, obviously hard to tell in the artwork, you know, from the iPad. But the food cost is the same. They're both unique critters. They're both blue governance. They're both worth 1 victory point. And obviously the difference here, besides the fact that mushroom and berry are 2 different food, but they're still basically the same resource. They do the same thing, and technically, right? But, you know, here you gain 1 mushroom after you play a construction. So obviously this is the opposite of the courthouse and all that jazz. So yeah, obviously this is the exact opposite of critter, you know. So, exact opposite of shopkeeper, obviously, because it's critter instead of construction. But other than that, they're exactly the same. So obviously there's some differences there for sure. It'll take some getting used to these differences that are like just slightly different, but still it'll take some getting used to for sure. So the customs officer and the judge are very similar. Victory points are different, obviously. Food cost is the same. They're both unique critters. And the ability is basically the same, except it doesn't say critter and construction like it does in the judge. But it's basically the same thing, if I'm assuming that this is the icon for wild resource in Farshore. You know, if that's the case. But yeah, like I said, other than the way they decided to word it, it's basically the same card, except for obviously victory point cost. But yeah, that's the similarities there. Oh, and then we have the customs office. Now, this one isn't really. There's some cards that are similar to it. So after you play a card, you may give 1 card to an opponent to gain a shell, which is a victory point, and draw a card. Well, if you look at these two cards, the Diplomat and the City Hall, they basically do the same thing separately. This one doing construction, this one doing critters, but they're both giving you cards and a victory point token in exchange if you happen to give your opponent a card, you know. In exchange, you get those two things. So it's basically the same thing in that regard. So it's these two cards combined into this one card here, basically, is what it is, as far as ability is concerned. But yeah, but obviously that's pretty similar still. Okay, so that's it for blue governance. So let's move on. We still got 3 more things to go through, and we should probably go through them faster since we're already 20 minutes into this. Okay, so next one is Red Destination. We're going to start with the Steward here. Now, if you look closely, these two cards are basically the same thing. Now, Chipsmith is from New Leaf, so it's not from the base game. It's from the New Leaf expansion. The food cost is the same, basically. They're both, obviously, Red Destination. They're both the same amount of victory points, and they both work the same as a worker placement, location, and they do the exact same thing. So this is like a really very perfect, almost identical version of the Steward. So it's one of the few cards that for sure is exactly the same. Okay, so the Post Office. Now, Post Office is a card that is actually in Everdell, the regular Everdell. But you'll notice right away that they are very different from each other. The resource cost is different. The only thing that really makes them the same is almost their name and the amount of victory points they are worth. Because while you are discarding cards from your hand here, your benefit is way different than your benefit with the Post Office. Because first of all, you have to give 2 cards to an opponent. You're not discarding first. You're giving 2 cards away, and then you're discarding any number of cards to draw up to your hand limit. While here, you're able to play a card for that many fewer resources for the amount of cards you discard. So it's a very different ability, even though they have the same name. It's a very different ability. So this is truly a unique card. I think this is one of the most unique cards in Farshore, I'd have to say. This is one of the most unique cards. But it's definitely one of my favorites because it just sounds really cool. So then we have the Inn. And obviously, the Bay is similar to the Meadow, right? So here you can, play a card from the Bay for 3 fewer resources. Here you can play a critter or a construction from the Meadow for 3 resources, fewer resources of your choice. So yeah, it's basically the same card, just worded a little differently. Obviously, Meadow and Bay are 2 different things, but they're the same term technically in the Everdell world. So, and obviously the resources are very similar as well. And obviously there isn't an open sign here. You'll notice there isn't an open sign, so there isn't an open sign. There is an open sign on the Inn, but there isn't an open sign here. So that's another difference as well. That's probably the biggest difference between the 2, actually, besides, obviously, the artwork. So let's move on. So we have the Illuminator. Now, the Illuminator can copy any Red Destination location ability at any player's city. Well, the Conductor basically does the exact same thing with a few restrictions. It has some restrictions of which Red Destination cards you can't copy, like the Chapel, for instance. You can't copy that one, and a few others. But it's basically the same card. Food cost is the same. Victory points is the same. Ability is basically the same. With obviously some different wording. And obviously the Conductor is from New Leaf. It's not from the core game. But you're noticing that some of the cards in this game are very similar to cards that are actually in New Leaf, surprisingly. So that's it for that. So let's move on. So the Cartographer here is very similar to the Lookout. Obviously, this is a critter, while this is a construction. The shoreline in any face-up island location is basically the same as copying up basic or forest location, basically. Obviously, the location of these places is different to each other because this is in the forest and this is on a beach. But other than that, they're basically the same card. Obviously, the cost in resources is going to be way different because this is a critter versus this is a construction. But they're both red destination cards. So while the ability is the same, some of the resources are obviously going to be different. So that's it for the red destination cards. We went through red destination pretty fast, so that's good. So let's move on to Tan Traveler. We've got a few in here to look at. Oh, there we go. So Stowaway. Obviously, the Stowaway and the Ranger are very similar to each other, okay? Food cost is a little different, but it's basically the same. Pretty close. Victory points is the same. They're both unique critters. Yeah, with the Stowaway, you can move one of your workers to a new location, even if occupied and activate it. This one doesn't let you do that. It lets you move one of your deployed workers to a new location, but it doesn't let you move it to an occupied location like it does this card. So the Stowaway is actually a better card than the Ranger is, but that's why it also costs a little bit more in food, I would imagine, because it's a little bit better. But basically, it's the same card. So, Ranger, Stowaway. Let's move on. Okay, so here we have the Shipwreck. So, the Shipwreck is the exact opposite as far as victory points is concerned with the University. But it's also a Tan Traveler, and the University is a red destination. So that's another big, huge difference. But they ultimately do something similar to the fact that you can discard a critter or a construction with the University, but you can discard a construction with the University from your city. This lets you discard a construction from your city to gain one treasure chest. So the benefit is completely different. Benefit is different. The type of card is different. The victory points is different. The only thing that, and then of course this doesn't take up space in your city either, so that's cool. But yeah, so it's a very different card for sure, as far as what you're gaining is concerned for sure. But it is at least somewhat similar in the fact that you can discard a construction from your city. That's like the only thing it has in common with it. So let's move on. So the Postal Pigeon is another card that was reintroduced into Farshore from the core game. And while the ability is very similar, there are still some differences even here. So the food cost is basically the same. 0 victory points is the same. They're both Tan Travelers, so that's the same. Both common critters, so that's the same. But with the Postal Pigeon, you reveal 2 cards, so you're not drawing. While the Postal Pigeon from Farshore is you're drawing 2 cards from the deck. Okay, and then it says you may play one of them for free and not Purple Prosperity. So you get to draw 2 cards from the deck, so that means you get to keep both of them even if you can't play them for free. Unlike with the Postal Pigeon, you reveal 2 cards, and if it's a gamble, you don't get to keep any of the cards if you can't play one. This one, you can may play one worth up to 3 victory points for free. This one, you can play one for free regardless of victory points, but you can't play Purple Prosperity. So there are definitely some differences here, but they're basically doing a similar thing. That they basically will let you play a card for free depending on, obviously, the restrictions. But the big difference is obviously draw and reveal, obviously. But yeah, that's another card that's similar but not quite the same. Okay, so the Hideout. You may discard up to 5 cards to both gain a shell, which is a victory point, and draw 1 card for each. Now, the Bard, it does, like I said, it does basically the same thing. The only difference here is you don't get cards with the Bard. You do with the Hideout. But they're both Tan Travelers. Obviously, this is a construction, so the resources are going to be way different. And this is obviously a critter, but they're both unique, too, as well. But obviously, I think this one's the better card, because you're getting cards back and point tokens after discarding 5 cards. This is way better. It's probably harder to play, though, because well, it's probably not that hard to play. It's each one of each resource, so it's actually not so bad. Hideout is probably still the best of the two. Similar, but not quite. Okay, next one. So here we have the Castaway. Now, this is a Tan Traveler card. Once again, we have a card here that's not a Tan Traveler. So this one allows you to discard a critter from your city to gain a treasure chest. So the benefit is completely different from the dungeon, for sure. We're not saying it's the same. We're only saying that you can discard you're not really discarding a critter, but you're putting a critter here in the dungeon, basically, to get a benefit. But you're, in a sense, you're discarding the critter from your city, in a sense. But once again, it's still not quite. Other than that, it's completely different because the benefit's different. Obviously, the victory points are a little different. You're getting a minus point, and instead of -1 point instead of 0 points with it. But it doesn't take up space in your city either. So, like I said, there's still a lot of differences with this card. I just thought I'd show it and there's only one similarity to it. Other than that, it would be completely different from everything. Okay, so that's it for Tan Traveler. So let's go to Purple Prosperity. And then we just got some, and then I'll just show you the rest of the cards that don't really have anything in common with Everdell at all, with the original Everdell. Okay, so Sculptor here, which is a lizard, and a critter, and the palace is obviously a construction. So those are different. They're both unique, though, obviously. They're both Purple Prosperity, both worth the same amount of victory points. Obviously, resources are going to be different, but they're basically the same ability, with the exception that you get 2 points for each unique construction in your city, while the palace only gets you 1. So that's the only real difference, besides the resources, obviously. So let's move on. Okay, so the Pilgrim, it doesn't actually have anything in common with this next card, but the interesting thing with the Pilgrim is these, wherever they are called, these are similar. You see, the thing about Farshore, there isn't any special events, and there isn't any events at all to basically get, like you need 2 certain, for a special event, you might need 2 certain cards. And if you have both of them in your city, then you could collect that special event, right? There's none of that going on. And there's no, regular events either. But it does have these, whatever they're called, that will require you to have a certain amount of green production, or a certain amount of blue governance, or a mixture of the 5 different types of cards. So in that regards, it's a little similar to the King card, because the King card is giving you extra victory points for those special events and those basic events, or should I say the basic events at least. And this is giving you extra victory points for something that's obviously not a basic or special event, but is still somewhat similar to how you would get a basic event at least. Other than that, it's a completely different card. Obviously, the victory points are different. The food cost is still a little different. But yeah, I mean, it's basically like the King. It's like it's like Farshore's version of the King, basically. So let's move on. Okay, so the manor here and the school. Obviously, they do almost the exact same thing. This one's giving you 2 victory points for common critters in your city. This one just gives you 1 point for common critters in your city. It's also worth less victory points than the manor is. And obviously, the resources are cheaper because it's not worth as many points. Unlike the manor here, which it's expensive. But other than that, it's basically the same card. So let's move on. Okay, so the harbor. The harbor is basically Farshore's version of the Evertree, except better. The resource cost is a little cheaper, but that doesn't necessarily mean that these resources are easier to get in Farshore. I think they're actually a little harder to get in Farshore. They're not as easy. But the cost of victory points is exactly the same. But the amount of victory points you get for Purple Prosperity is way more. You get 3 for Harbor for every Purple Prosperity you have in your city. You get 3 versus the Evertree that only gives you 1. So this is a way better card, I think, for sure. But obviously, it is very similar to the Evertree. Let's move on. Okay, so Once again, the governor and the castle are very similar to each other, except the victory point thing is going to be different. So 2 versus 1, but they're basically the same thing other than food, other than resource cost and stuff like that. But victory points is the same. Okay, moving on. So then we have gardens. So the gardens is a construction, so is the theater. And this one's giving you 2 victory points for unique critters, while the theater only gives you 1. It's also only going to give you 3 victory points, the theater. The gardens gives you 4, but as you can see, the resources are way more expensive than the theater is. But basically, they're very similar. And then the admiral here is, I guess, a little similar to the king as far as victory points is concerned. They're both high authority individuals, characters, people. The food cost is a little different, but it's still pretty high. And this whatever this does has something to do with something that gives you a lot of victory points, like a replacement idea for special events or something like that, potentially. So they're very similar in that regards, that you're getting extra victory points for something you're doing or something you obtain or something like that, just like the king. Obviously, there's still a lot of differences, but once again, they're pretty close. So those are all the cards that I've seen. There might be some that I didn't see that I have seen that are similar to existing cards in the original Everdell. But there are still some cards in this game that don't really have anything in common with regular Everdell. So let's go ahead and just look at those. I didn't zoom in on this one, so we'll just kind of bring it up to you guys. So this is obviously something you won't see in regular Everdell. You get victory points for green productions in your city. That's cool. That's not really in the core game of Everdell that I'm aware of. Okay, so then the rest are not zoomed in. So this gaining 1 treasure chest and it's a green production. Well, that's unique to Farshore. So this is a unique card to Farshore for sure. So you got to see it. Moving on. The sloop here, you get to move your boat 2 spaces. Well, that's unique to Farshore. So that's why it's not related to anything in this deck of cards. Another green production. That's right. We talked about this one earlier. I forgot to remove it. This one, another one that moves the boat. The sailmaker here. It moves your boat 1 space. So once again, it doesn't really have anything to do with regular Everdell. Okay, this one is powerful. And there's cards that definitely do stuff to this extent. I mean, not to this extent, but do stuff similar to this, right? But not to this extent that I'm aware of, unless it's like a legendary card from the base game or something like that. There might be something like that similar. But like as far as just regular cards that you can get, not that I can think of. But this is also a one-time thing too. It's a Tan Traveler, but it's a powerful ability for sure. And it's still worth 1 victory point. And if that is wild resources, that means you can do any resource you want to play it. That's pretty cool. The Pirate, which is a lizard. And call me cold-blooded one more time. Oh, that makes me laugh inside, yes. Because he's cold-blooded, so don't call him cold-blooded. Unless you mean it as far as him being an actual cold-blooded reptile, But yeah, this is unique to Farshore. Treasure chests, unique to Farshore for sure. Once again, this is another card unique to Farshore. Moving the boat and whatever that icon is, that's unique to Farshore for sure. The next card here, getting victory points for each blue governance, red destination, Tan Traveler in your city. That's pretty unique, I'd have to say. I don't know of any cards in Everdell core game that is exactly the same as that for sure. So, another card that's unique to Farshore. The galley, moving the boat 3 spaces. That's unique to Farshore for sure. And we'll go back so you can look at it more. Pause the video if you need to. The galleon. This is another one, obviously unique to Everdell Farshore for sure. Treasure chests and all that, getting points, victory points for that. The crow's nest, this is Red Destination, but going here lets you move the boat 3 spaces. Unique to Farshore for sure. Another Red Destination that lets you get treasure chests. Once again, unique to Farshore. Another card that's pretty unique to Farshore that there might be something similar, and I'm just not able to think of it right now. There might be something in one of the expansions of Everdell or something like that that's similar to this, but it's still pretty unique as far as the base game is concerned, because the base game, not including extra cards and legendary cards that I didn't really take a look at, you know, it has no similarities to the base game for sure of Everdell. So it's pretty unique to this Everdell Farshore game. And that was the last card I wanted to show you guys. That's all of the new cards. That's all of the similarities, all of the differences that I found. I hope you guys liked this video, even if you just were just watching it to see the new cards. I hope you guys liked it. Don't forget to leave me a like if you guys liked it. And now it's time to go, because now I'm starting to lose my voice. Bye.